Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that the US dollar is no longer the world's most powerful currency. International trade comes to a standstill. Oil prices become wildly unstable. Stock markets around the world crash. Governments scramble to protect their economies. It sounds like the plot of a Hollywood movie. But for decades, one financial system has helped keep the US dollar at the center of the global economy. That system is known as the petrodollar. Many people believe it is one of the most powerful economic arrangements ever created. Others argue its importance is sometimes exaggerated. But one thing is certain: oil, the US dollar, and the Middle East have been closely connected for decades. This has led many people to ask a difficult question. Why has the Middle East remained so strategically important to the United States? And why has Iran, in particular, been at the center of so many geopolitical tensions? Is it only about nuclear weapons? Is it about regional influence? Or does the global oil trade also play an important role? In today's video, we are going to explore how the petrodollar system works, how it developed, why Iran matters, and why this topic continues to spark debate among economists, historians, and geopolitical analysts. By the end of this documentary, you'll understand why a single barrel of oil can have consequences far beyond the energy market. The dollar that changed the world. To understand the petrodollar, we first need to travel back to the end of World War II. The world had been devastated by conflict. Europe's economy was in ruins. Many countries had exhausted their gold reserves. The United States, however, emerged as the world's strongest economic power. It held the largest gold reserves on earth. Its industries were booming. Its military had become unmatched. In 1944, representatives from 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Their goal was to rebuild the global financial system. The agreement they reached changed world economics forever. Under the Bretton Woods system, the US dollar became the foundation of international finance. Other major currencies were linked to the dollar, and the dollar itself was backed by gold. The exchange rate was fixed. The birth of the petrodollar, the early 1970s, were also a period of major turmoil in global energy markets. Oil had become the fuel powering modern economies. Factories depended on it. Transportation depended on it. Military forces depended on it. Without oil, economic activity could slow dramatically. At the same time, Middle Eastern producers had become increasingly influential. Saudi Arabia had emerged as one of the world's largest oil exporters and a leading member of OPEC. Following the 1973 oil crisis, the United States and Saudi Arabia developed a close strategic relationship. While historians continue to debate every detail of the arrangements made during this period, one widely accepted outcome was that Saudi Arabia priced its oil exports in US dollars. Over time, many other major oil exporters also sold oil in dollars. This had enormous consequences. Imagine that Japan wanted to import oil. Japan first needed US dollars. If Germany wanted oil, it also needed dollars. India? Dollars. Brazil? Dollars. South Korea? Dollars. No matter where a country was located, if it wanted to buy oil on international markets, the US dollar became the dominant currency for those transactions. Suddenly, countries around the world had a strong reason to hold large reserves of US dollars. Banks accumulated dollars. Central banks accumulated dollars. Governments accumulated dollars. The dollar's global role remained exceptionally strong, even without being backed by gold. This system became widely known as the petrodollar system. Supporters argue that it reinforced the dollar's position as the world's leading reserve currency. However, economists also note that other factors, such as the size of the US economy, deep financial markets, and confidence in American institutions, have also played major roles in maintaining the dollar's dominance. In other words, the petrodollar was an important piece of a much larger economic picture. E&OF part 1 ounce of gold could be exchanged for 35 US dollars. This meant countries trusted the dollar because, in theory, it could always be converted into gold. For more than 2 decades, the system worked remarkably well. Global trade expanded. Economic growth accelerated. The dollar became the preferred currency for international commerce. But success created a new problem. America's growing challenge. As the global economy expanded, more dollars were needed around the world. The United States began spending heavily. It financed major domestic programs. It fought expensive wars overseas, including the Vietnam War. Gradually, more dollars were circulating than the US had gold to back. Countries started asking an uncomfortable question. Could America really exchange every dollar for gold if everyone demanded it at once? The answer was becoming increasingly uncertain. By the late 1960s, confidence in the system began to weaken. Some countries started exchanging their dollars for gold. America's gold reserves steadily declined. The financial pressure kept growing. Then, in August 1971, President Richard Nixon made a historic announcement. The United States would suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold. This decision became known as the Nixon shock. In a single speech, the global monetary system changed forever. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. Instead, it became a fiat currency. Its value depended on confidence in the US government and economy rather than on a fixed amount of precious metal. Many economists feared this would reduce international demand for the dollar. If countries no longer needed dollars because they were backed by gold, why would they continue holding large dollar reserves? America needed a new source of demand. And that is where oil entered the story. The birth of the petrodollar, the early 1970s, were also a period of major turmoil in global energy markets. Oil had become the fuel powering modern economies. Factories depended on it. Transportation depended on it. Military forces depended on it. Without oil, economic activity could slow dramatically. At the same time, Middle Eastern producers had become increasingly influential. Saudi Arabia had emerged as one of the world's largest oil exporters and a leading member of OPEC. Following the 1973 oil crisis, the United States and Saudi Arabia developed a close strategic relationship. While historians continue to debate every detail of the arrangements made during this period, one widely accepted outcome was that Saudi Arabia priced its oil exports in US dollars. Over time, many other major oil exporters also sold oil in dollars. This had enormous consequences. Imagine that Japan wanted to import oil. Japan first needed US dollars. If Germany wanted oil, it also needed dollars. India? Dollars. Brazil? Dollars. South Korea? Dollars. No matter where a country was located, if it wanted to buy oil on international markets, the US dollar became the dominant currency for those transactions. Suddenly, countries around the world had a strong reason to hold large reserves of US dollars. Banks accumulated dollars. Central banks accumulated dollars. Governments accumulated dollars. The dollar's global role remained exceptionally strong, even without being backed by gold. This system became widely known as the Petrodollar System. Supporters argue that it reinforced the dollar's position as the world's leading reserve currency. However, economists also note that other factors, such as the size of the US economy, deep financial markets, and confidence in American institutions, have also played major roles in maintaining the dollar's dominance. In other words, the petrodollar was an important piece of a much larger economic picture. How the petrodollar made the dollar more powerful? By the mid-1970s, the United States had solved a problem that many economists feared would weaken its currency. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. Yet, instead of losing its influence, it remained the backbone of the global financial system. Why? Because almost every country on earth needed one thing that was priced primarily in US dollars: oil. Think about it this way. Imagine you own the only store in the world selling drinking water. No matter where people come from, they must first exchange their local currency for yours before they can make a purchase. As long as they need water, they also need your currency. This is similar to how the global oil market operated for decades. Countries importing oil typically needed access to US dollars, encouraging governments and central banks to keep large dollar reserves. This demand supported the dollar's role in international trade. But the benefits for the United States went even further. Foreign governments purchased large amounts of US Treasury bonds. This helped finance government spending at relatively low borrowing costs. American financial markets became even more attractive to international investors. The dollar became deeply integrated into global banking, international trade, and cross-border finance. However, many economists caution that this wasn't only because of oil. The size of the US economy, strong legal institutions, liquid financial markets, and confidence in the Federal Reserve have all contributed to the dollar's global dominance. The petrodollar strengthened an already powerful system. It didn't create it entirely on its own. Why Iran is so important? Now let's turn our attention to Iran. If you look at a map, Iran immediately stands out. It sits at the crossroads of the Middle East, Central Asia, and South Asia. It borders the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. But geography is only part of the story. Iran possesses some of the world's largest proven oil and natural gas reserves. These energy resources have made the country strategically significant for decades. Even under heavy international sanctions, Iran remains an important energy producer. Yet Iran's greatest strategic advantage may not be underground. It may be its location. The Strait of Hormuz. There is a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman called the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, it doesn't seem remarkable. But this narrow passage is one of the world's most important maritime choke points. A significant share of globally traded crude oil and liquefied natural gas passes through it each day. Tankers carrying energy supplies from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar travel through this route before reaching markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. If this waterway were seriously disrupted, the consequences could be felt across the global economy. Oil prices could rise sharply. Shipping costs could increase. Inflation could worsen in countries that rely on imported energy. That's why every period of heightened tension in the Strait of Hormuz attracts worldwide attention. Financial markets often react within minutes. Governments closely monitor developments. Energy companies prepare contingency plans. Even countries far from the Middle East can feel the effects. Iran's strategic leverage. Because Iran borders the Strait of Hormuz, it has long been viewed as a country with significant strategic influence over regional security. Iranian leaders have, at various times, warned that if their security were threatened or if sanctions intensified, shipping through the strait could be affected. In practice, closing the strait completely would be extremely difficult due to the presence of multiple regional and international naval forces and the severe economic consequences for many countries, including Iran itself. Nevertheless, even the possibility of disruption is enough to unsettle global markets. This is why developments involving Iran often become global headlines. Why the United States pays close attention from the perspective of the United States and many of its allies, ensuring that international shipping lanes remain open is considered a major security priority. The US has maintained a significant military presence in the Persian Gulf for decades. US officials have stated that this presence is intended to protect freedom of navigation, deter attacks on commercial shipping, support regional partners, help maintain stability in global energy markets. Critics, however, argue that these policies also serve broader geopolitical and economic interests. This debate continues among analysts, policymakers, and historians. What is clear is that the Persian Gulf remains one of the world's most strategically important regions. The 1979 Iranian Revolution. To understand today's tensions, we need to go back to 1979. Before the revolution, Iran was ruled by Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. The Shah maintained close relations with the United States. Western investment flowed into Iran. Security cooperation between the two countries was strong, but many Iranians opposed the Shah's rule. They criticized corruption, political repression, and growing inequality. Mass protests spread across the country. In 1979, the Shah left Iran. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile. The Islamic Republic of Iran was established. This transformed US-Iran relations almost overnight. Soon after, Iranian students seized the US embassy in Tehran and took dozens of American diplomats hostage. The crisis lasted 444 days. The event shocked the United States and marked the beginning of decades of hostility between the two governments. Economic sanctions followed. Diplomatic relations were severed. Mutual distrust deepened. From that point onward, every major regional crisis, from the Iran-Iraq war to nuclear negotiations and proxy conflicts, was shaped by this strained relationship. Sanctions and the oil economy. Over the following decades, the United States and several other countries imposed sanctions on Iran. These measures targeted sectors such as oil exports, banking shipping technology, financial transactions. The stated goals included limiting Iran's nuclear program and responding to concerns about regional activities and missile development. Supporters of sanctions argue they are a tool to pressure governments without resorting to full-scale war. Critics argue that sanctions can also have significant humanitarian and economic impacts on ordinary people. Regardless of where one stands, sanctions dramatically affected Iran's economy and its ability to sell oil on international markets. Yet Iran continued to search for alternative trading partners and payment mechanisms. This raised an important question. Could countries eventually trade oil without relying primarily on the US dollar? That question brings us to one of the most important developments in modern geopolitics. Can the world trade oil without the dollar? For decades, the US dollar has been the dominant currency in international oil trade. But in recent years, an important question has started to emerge. What if countries no longer needed the dollar to buy oil? Would the global financial system change? Could America's economic influence weaken? Or is the dollar simply too deeply embedded in the world economy to be replaced anytime soon? These questions have become more relevant as several countries have explored alternatives to the dollar for some international trade. The rise of China. China is now the world's second largest economy and one of the biggest importers of crude oil. Every single day, China buys millions of barrels of oil from countries around the world. Naturally, China has an interest in expanding the international use of its own currency, the Chinese yuan, also known as the renminbi. In 2018, China launched yuan-denominated oil futures contracts. Some energy exporters have also accepted yuan for certain transactions. Although these deals receive significant attention, they still represent only part of the global oil market. The US dollar remains the most widely used currency for international trade, finance, and foreign exchange reserves. Even so, China's efforts demonstrate that some countries are looking for greater flexibility in how global trade is conducted. Russia and Western sanctions. Another major shift occurred after Russia faced extensive Western sanctions following its invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Many Russian banks were cut off from parts of the international financial system. In response, Russia expanded trade using currencies other than the US dollar with several partners. Energy exports to countries such as China and India increasingly involved local currencies or other payment arrangements. This did not replace the dollar globally, but it showed that countries under sanctions may seek alternative financial channels. Iran's search for alternatives. Iran has faced economic sanctions for many years. As a result, it has repeatedly explored different methods of conducting international trade. These have included barter arrangements, transactions in local currencies, cooperation with countries willing to trade outside traditional dollar-based systems. While these methods have helped facilitate some trade, sanctions have continued to place significant constraints on Iran's economy. The emergence of BRICS around the same time, another development began attracting worldwide attention. A group of major emerging economies known as BRICS, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, started discussing ways to increase trade using their own currencies. The group has since expanded to include additional member countries. Supporters argue that reducing dependence on a single currency could provide greater financial flexibility. Others believe these efforts could gradually reshape parts of the international monetary system. However, creating a true alternative to the dollar is far more complicated than simply choosing another currency. A global reserve currency requires stable financial markets, deep pools of investment capital, strong legal institutions, confidence from governments and investors around the world. These are factors that have supported the dollar's dominant role for decades. Why the dollar still dominates? Many people assume that because some countries are trading in other currencies, the dollar is about to collapse, but most economists disagree. The US dollar continues to account for a large share of global foreign exchange reserves, international trade settlements, cross-border banking, global debt issuance, foreign exchange transactions. Large multinational companies often prefer using dollars because it reduces exchange rate risk and provides access to highly liquid financial markets. The United States also has one of the largest and most liquid government bond markets in the world. This makes US Treasury securities attractive to investors seeking relatively safe assets. In other words, the dollar's strength rests on much more than oil alone. The petrodollar has historically reinforced demand for dollars, but it is only one part of a much broader financial ecosystem. So, is the petrodollar the real reason behind US-Iran tensions? This is where many discussions become oversimplified. Some videos on the internet claim that every US policy in the Middle East is designed solely to protect the petrodollar. That is a dramatic claim, but it is not supported by clear evidence. Foreign policy is rarely driven by a single factor. Instead, governments typically consider multiple strategic interests at the same time. In the case of US-Iran relations, analysts point to several major issues: Iran's nuclear program, regional security concerns, missile development, support for allied groups and proxy conflicts, the security of Israel and Gulf allies, freedom of navigation through the Persian Gulf, the stability of global energy markets, broader competition for geopolitical influence. Energy and the global financial system may be part of this broader picture, but they are not the only explanations. Understanding this complexity is essential. Simple answers rarely explain complex international relationships. Today, the global economy is changing. Countries are experimenting with new payment systems. Digital currencies are being explored. Regional trade agreements are expanding. New economic alliances are forming. Yet the US dollar remains the world's leading reserve currency. Whether that changes gradually over the coming decades or remains largely intact will depend on many factors, including economic performance, technological innovation, geopolitical stability, and the confidence of global investors. What if the Strait of Hormuz were closed? Imagine this. Tomorrow morning, news breaks that the Strait of Hormuz has been completely shut down because of a major military conflict. Within minutes, Oil traders around the world begin to panic. Stock markets fall. Shipping companies suspend routes. Insurance costs for oil tankers skyrocket. Governments call emergency meetings. Why? Because nearly 20% of the world's seaborne crude oil passes through this narrow waterway. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar rely heavily on this route to export energy. If the flow of oil were significantly disrupted, the effects would be felt far beyond the Middle East. Fuel prices could rise. Transportation costs could increase. Food prices might also climb as shipping becomes more expensive. Inflation could put pressure on economies across the world. This is one reason why the security of the Persian Gulf remains a major concern for many governments, not just the United States. Fortunately, there are alternative pipelines and export routes for some producers, and governments maintain strategic petroleum reserves to help cushion temporary disruptions. But replacing such a large shipping route overnight would be extremely difficult. Could the US dollar lose its dominance? For decades, many people have predicted the end of the US dollar's dominance. Yet the dollar has remained remarkably resilient. Why? Because a reserve currency isn't just about trade, it is about trust. Around the world, investors still view US Treasury bonds as one of the safest and most liquid assets available. International businesses continue to use the dollar because it simplifies global transactions. Banks, corporations, and governments already operate within a financial system built around the dollar. Changing that system would require enormous time, coordination, and confidence in alternatives. That doesn't mean change is impossible. History shows that no global financial system lasts forever, but transitions usually happen gradually, not overnight. Today, countries such as China are encouraging greater international use of the yuan. The European Union continues to promote the euro in international finance. Some nations are expanding trade in local currencies. Digital payment systems and central bank digital currencies (CBDCs) are also being explored. These developments may gradually diversify the global financial system, even if the dollar remains the leading currency for the foreseeable future. So, is the petrodollar the hidden reason behind every conflict in the Middle East? The evidence doesn't support such a simple conclusion. International politics is rarely driven by a single motive. US-Iran relations have been shaped by decades of events, including the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the US Embassy hostage crisis, Iran's nuclear program, regional security concerns, alliances and proxy conflicts, economic sanctions, global energy markets, competition among major powers, oil, and the dollar's role in global finance forms one important piece of this much larger puzzle. Recognizing that complexity is essential if we want to understand world affairs. The story of the petrodollar isn't just about money. It isn't just about oil. And it isn't just about the United States or Iran. It's about how economics, energy, politics, and security are deeply connected. A decision made in Washington can influence oil prices in Asia. Tensions in the Persian Gulf can affect fuel costs in Europe. Financial sanctions imposed on one country can reshape trade relationships across entire regions. In today's interconnected world, events in one corner of the globe can have consequences thousands of miles away. As new economic powers rise, new technologies emerge, and alternative payment systems develop, the global financial landscape will continue to evolve. Whether the dollar remains dominant for decades to come, or whether the world gradually moves toward a more multipolar monetary system, is a question that only time can answer. One thing is certain: understanding the relationship between energy, finance, and geopolitics is more important than ever. Because in today's world, the biggest battles are not always fought on the battlefield. Sometimes they are fought in oil markets, financial systems, and global trade routes, and their consequences can shape the future of the entire world. If you found this documentary informative, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into history, economics, and global geopolitics. And now we want to hear from you. Do you think the US dollar will remain the world's dominant currency over the next 20 years, or will another currency challenge its position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next documentary.